The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village, offering research-based arts, music, fitness, and lifelong learning programs at their assisted living and Alzheimer's care community in Westfield. armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Adam Frenier in for Carrie Saldo. Joining us in studio today, NEPM's Nancy Cohen and Greg Sukenik, news editor with the Berkshire Eagle, and on the line, Dusty Christensen, investigative editor with the Shoestring and a frequent NEPM contributor. Today, part 2 of our 2024 news from the 413 retrospective. Each topic we will explore what happened, what's changed, and where will this issue go from here. And if you happen to miss part 1 last week, of course, you can go to our website, nepm.org, and check that out. I should note that the stories that we'll be discussing today are not necessarily ranked in order of importance. We're just going to pull things out of a hat and see what happens. And if you'd like to get in on that conversation, send us an email at therundown@nepm.org. A little bit later, we'll discuss what federal rule changes regarding the repatriation of Native American remains has meant to Western Massachusetts. We'll also see where the conversation stands after incidents earlier this year with some racial overtones that took place at a playoff basketball game involving Pittsfield High School. But first, we will stay in the Berkshires. And this is a topic that's on this year's list. It may be on next year's list in future years to come as well. Further cleanup efforts of the Housatonic River in Berkshire County. General Electric polluted the body of water decades ago with PCBs, which are toxic, when it operated a factory in Pittsfield. There's been much legal wrangling, controversy, and outcry in recent years over how GE will clean up a second stretch of the river. And of late, the focus has been on how and where the company will dispose of contaminated sediment from the Housatonic. I bring in Nancy Cohen of NEPM, who's been reporting on this since I graduated from high school in 1998. Nancy, you've reported on this extensively. What's the latest right now? I know this is a story that goes back years and decades, but where are things right now as they get ready to clean up the next stretch of the Housatonic?
Well, GE, the EPA, citizens, public officials are all sort of digging into how this, no pun intended, digging into how the soil and sediment will be excavated from the river and where it will go and how it will get there. And so in late 2023, GE presented a transportation plan. And people criticized it, citizens criticized it, public officials criticized it, and even Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey criticized it for being truck-centric. And they asked GE to go back and take rail seriously. And GE did. GE presented its new plan recently in front of a huge audience, and people as Greg said earlier, that people for the first time we're hearing people say, hey, this is a good thing. You did a good thing. You changed your plan.
Greg Sukenik is the news editor with the Berkshire Eagle. And Greg, feel free to jump in.
Sure. I go back even a little further on PCBs back to the mid-'90s. It's rare when you actually have people, in this process tell GE, hey, we really like what you did, but they're going to rely a great deal more on hydraulic conveyance of sediment from most parts of the river. And that's going to allow them, and they're also using rail they had before they said, well, there's not sidings for, that we can use right now. But they were said, well, you could build some. So there's 2 or 3 sites for sidings along the river because the state-owned rail right-of-way of the Housatonic Railroad runs mostly along the Housatonic River. So that offers them the opportunity to do some multimodal work, although there still are going to be trucks involved. And those trucks are still going to be bringing sediment to the upland disposal facility, the PCB landfill slated for Lee.
Yeah, and also what's happening is, yes, people were pleased with the way the plan changed. There's more hydraulic pumping of the waste. There's more use of rail, less use of trucks. But people in Lee and people from the Tri-Town Health Commission, which oversees Lee, said, hey, wait a minute. Why are we waiting? A big for people that don't know, the heart of this cleanup plan, one of the hearts of this cleanup plan, and one of the most controversial issues is that a disposal site, a dump for PCB waste, is planned for the town of Lee. And so people there are now saying, after this transportation plan came out, hey, why aren't we getting at this quicker? Why aren't we excavating the waste quicker? Why aren't we creating more sites along the rail, to even more sites to get it out and transport it by rail? Why are we waiting for this dump to get built?
And Nancy, this is a project that could take up to 15 years once it eventually does begin, right?
That's right. That's right. And just the EPA says we chose a disposal site. We chose this plan with the dump because it is the best way forward. EPA continues to say this is the best way forward. Many years ago, they actually had a plan which shipped all of the waste to out-of-state facilities.
Dusty Christensen of the Shoestring. Curious to get your thoughts on all this. This is a story that's obviously been going on for decades. It seems like it's getting closer to fruition, but what do you think about all of this?
I just think that looking forward, this perhaps gives us an example of what other cleanup efforts may look like as we as a society begin to grapple with some of the other real serious pollution and contaminants that are in our environment. I'm, of course, thinking about PFAS, or what are known sometimes as forever chemicals, which is a ballooning problem here in our state and across the region, across the country. This PCB situation on the Housatonic really shows the immense logistical challenges to putting together a cleanup effort like this, the huge political transportation challenges, and I don't mean to be a downer here, but I suspect that we will be seeing similar fights in the future as we begin to grapple with some of the other sources of pollution that perhaps we've been shoving under the rug for a long time.
Greg, go ahead.
I would also, this process is also going to point to how long it takes for these things to happen. I mean, we're still talking about, we're very just in the beginning planning phases of reaches 5 and 6. That's the part of the Housatonic that meanders from Pittsfield, from the confluence south to Woods Pond, where a lot of the sediment is settled behind the dam. And also the landfill is going to take a couple of years to build. Now, to your point about whether they should have some more sites and they should start removing earlier, one of the things that the project manager from EPA did say was that, well, we really don't want to start doing removal further downriver and then have, before we're done removing sediment from up the river, because then we're going to recontaminate things. But then, I mean, the question of recontamination all comes up because there's still a lot of folks who are unsatisfied with the amount of sediment that's going to come out of the river and why that sediment isn't being treated instead of disposed in a landfill on a former gravel quarry over an aquifer.
Yeah, the reason that the EPA is concerned about PCBs is they consider them a likely carcinogen, and in 2021. Just to talk about what's happened this past year, back in 2021, a city councilor in Pittsfield named Kevin Morandi, there are already 2 PCB disposal sites in Pittsfield, one of which is next to an elementary school. So in 2021, Kevin Morandi, who lives near one of them, said, DPH, can you do a cancer study? They said, yes, we will do it. And then last year they said, in February of 2024, they said, we're going to complete it by the end of this year. Now they're saying, they're not really giving a date. They're saying sometime this winter. So people are waiting for a cancer study.
And as we look to 2025, of course, there's going to be a new presidential administration. Where do you see this cleanup effort going? I'd like to hear from all of you about this. Dusty, let me start with you. Obviously, the Trump administration's coming back. We know that first administration's record as far as the EPA goes. Do you think the folks in the Berkshires should be concerned about any of this as far as this river cleanup goes?
I think anybody who is in support of regulating pollution, regulating harmful chemicals and pollutants, frankly, should be concerned about an administration that has promised to eviscerate those regulations, to do away with what they call the administrative state, agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, not to mention others like the National Labor Relations Board and so many other regulatory agencies. I imagine that coming down from the federal government over the next 4 years. There's going to be a lot less scrutiny on polluters like this. There's going to be a lot less support from the federal government for cleanup efforts and for holding big companies accountable for the pollution they've done over many years.
Greg?
I think that's a legitimate concern. I know in Pittsfield, and throughout the Berkshires, people are just sort of, this has been a very, very long process. And there's folks who are like, can we just start this already? But there was a consent decree covering this, and that was signed in 2000. And so, to that extent, whether that can be unraveled or not, that's a good question.
And the other thing is that we don't know who's going to be the new administrator in Washington of the EPA, but I do know that the staff at the EPA Region 1 have been there a long time. They've been working on this a long time. They're very serious about what they're doing, and my sense is they'll keep at it.
Let's stay with the environment. Another story that's been front of mind in 2024 has been the changing climate and related extreme weather events. Western Massachusetts is still experiencing varying degrees of drought despite recent precipitation, and that's after a very dry fall. Of course, that dry fall led to a rash of wildfires in the area. There's also been ongoing recovery efforts from past floods and talks about what to do about all of this. One of the culprits to a changing climate is greenhouse gas emissions. Dusty, in the shoestring, you looked at who some of the largest emitters of carbon are in the area. What did you find out?
Yeah, it is very interesting to look at. We were just speaking about the Environmental Protection Agency, and that federal agency puts out data frequently that show every year who the biggest greenhouse gas polluters are in various regions. We at the Shoestring decided to look at Western Massachusetts, the Connecticut River Valley in particular, to get a sense of where all of our greenhouse gases are coming from. It may not be a surprise to people, but it is important to know where the vast majority of those emissions are coming from. Now, that data focuses on large facilities, and so some industries are not captured within that data. Transportation is one of those. It is a massive source of greenhouse gases, not just in our state, but all over the place. Transportation and buildings account for 72% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions in our state. Another 20% comes from the generation of electrical power. But so these facilities largely are power plants, large factories. And another source of greenhouse gas is methane, not just carbon, and that is coming out of landfills. So we found that there are a number of power plants in our region, many of them located in Hampden County, that are among the top greenhouse gas polluters here locally, as well as the University of Massachusetts Amherst Physical Plant Building, which may seem surprising until you consider that UMass Amherst essentially is a small city, a bigger city maybe in some of our other cities around here, and they have to heat and power a whole range of buildings on that campus. I think these things are important to keep in mind because our state is moving closer and closer towards its goal of becoming carbon neutral. And these are the facilities that we're going to have to really be focusing on, the parts of our economy that we're going to have to be looking to decarbonize. And in the case of landfills, they emit methane because of organic material that decomposes in them. We're going to have to find a way to keep that organic material, wood products, food scraps, out of landfills.
Greg, the Berkshires have had it tough the last couple of years. There was a terrible flooding last year in North Adams. This year, right before Thanksgiving, that massive wildfire in Great Barrington. How have people been coping with all this? There's been some very difficult times because of the climate in the Berkshires in the last 2 years.
Sure. We're not as accustomed to wildfires here in the east as they are in the west. My brother lives in Montana. I was out there in the summer and was incredibly smoky, and apparently that's something that happens on days ending in Y. So to find a hillside on fire in Great Barrington and to have that burning for days and to be out of control and having people really concerned for several days, that was something that we poured a lot of resources into, and the surrounding towns poured a lot of resources into. I wanted to tie back in on something about methane just really quickly, because a lot of what I worked on this year as in reporting in Pittsfield had to do with the city finally adopting a pay-as-you-throw plan. And we did a lot of looking at...
We're talking about garbage, of course.
Garbage. Again, we're going back to municipal waste. And that reporting, a lot of folks talked about limiting food waste and about composting. Pittsfield not composting yet. Some towns are. There's a couple paid programs. But the interesting thing is that Pittsfield finally is trying to get at increasing its recycling and decreasing the amount of municipal waste, but really the driver on that was as much of it was the environment, it was more so the cost, because Pittsfield was spending $5 million a year on trash and recycling removal.
And Nancy, I know state officials have been talking about what to do amidst this drought situation, which still hasn't resolved itself, even though we've received some rain and some snow of late.
No,
right?
it hasn't resolved itself. The Drought Management Task Force will meet in early January to decide, are we going to stay in this critical level of drought, which is one step above emergency level, or are we out of it yet? I also want to mention that this past year started with a lot of rain. We had some of the wettest periods. We had one of the wettest periods in record between December of 2023 and March of 2024 in places like Amherst and Worcester. And now from September until the end of November, we've had one of the driest periods on record in some places. And Mike Rollins from UMass Amherst, who I interviewed, he says they're calling this weather whiplash. However, flipping back and forth, however, most climate models say New England is going to be wet because of climate change.
We're going to take a brief time out. Still to come, we'll revisit what changes in federal rules surrounding the repatriation of Native Americans has meant to tribes and local institutions. Also, where do things stand after a racist incident at a high school playoff basketball game last season? Have something to say on that or anything? Email the rundown at nepm.org. You're listening to The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to The Rundown. I'm Adam Frenier in for Carrie Saldo, joined this week by Nancy Cohen of NEPM, Greg Sukenik of the Berkshire Eagle, and Dusty Christensen of the Shoestring. We continue now with our 2024 news from the 413 retrospective, taking a look at what happened, what's changed, and where things will go from here. We move along now to a shift in federal rules which impacts how the remains of Native Americans are repatriated with their tribes. Some institutions, such as museums, still hold such remains. The rules also require consent from tribes before artifacts can be displayed. Nancy, what have both the museums and the tribes been saying about these changes? And just feel free to fill us in with some more details about this.
Sure. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act first went into effect in 1990, but as of last year, in the beginning of the year, we had nearly 100,000. The remains of nearly 100,000 Native people still on museum shelves. The way this came about is that in the 1900s or even in the late 1800s, archaeologists would go and dig up graves. Amateur archaeologists, people that were just curious, would dig up artifacts and graves, or people were unearthed when a farmer plowed a field or when a building was being excavated. And the remains ended up in museums and libraries and historical societies. And so there's been, this law was passed in 1990, but it's been very slow in terms of returning the remains of Native people back to the tribes. So this new law went into effect. New federal rules went into effect for the law in January of this year. And it sped up the process. It gave a very tight deadline, 5 years to repatriate. So museums had to hire more staff and educate themselves if they didn't know how to do this process, and work more closely with tribes. One thing that got changed is this. There's evidence. In the past, some museums have treated this as a scientific research project. So they did a lot of work before they would repatriate. But what tribes are saying, if you unearthed a person in Turner's Falls, then you can figure out what tribe is associated with that individual. And so geographic location has become a new line of evidence that's allowed and underscored. And just one last thing. I hope I'm not going on too long. But, one thing that I think is really interesting when you think about this is you can be overwhelmed when you start to think huge numbers, nearly 100,000 Native people on museum shelves. But if you want to think about it from our world, from Western Mass, the data that's available is very helpful. It can tell us where individuals from our counties were found, where they are, what museums they're in, et cetera.
And Greg, I know the Eagles reported on this. What's been going on with cultural institutions in the Berkshires as far as repatriation of Native American remains goes?
Well, the Berkshire Museum in Pittsfield had, I think, a total of 4 sets of remains, and 2 of those, we did a story earlier this year about how the Berkshire Museum was going to return 2 sets of those remains to the Stockbridge-Munsee community band of Mohican Indians, which is now located in Wisconsin. They were Berkshire County residents before colonists showed up. So we went into it's sort of this lengthy process, and there's obviously there's sort of the cataloging and detailing and making make sure to check all the boxes, but there's also relationships that need to be established, and being respectful of the Native peoples and sort of the way that process works. So, I mean, one thing that's helped for the museum is that they're working with some folks at Williams College who are helping to make that happen. The Berkshire Museum, I think, is like a lot of smaller museums where it collected a lot of artifacts in the 19th and 20th centuries. Zenas Crane founded it pretty much with the stuff he had collected, being the wealthy owner of a paper mill, so it's been as you're talking, the process is speeding up, but it takes longer than you would think.
And Dusty, how about this idea of balancing the return of remains or even artifacts while also trying to educate the public about the history of these tribes at some of these museums?
Yeah, I just think that, as Nancy was saying, this law was initially passed many years ago. Native folks have been calling for this repatriation for many, many years. And I don't think there's any conflict with speeding up that repatriation process and continuing to provide education for the broader public. I think that, true education about how this country has treated its indigenous communities starts by respecting what those indigenous communities have been asking for years and years.
One thing is that museums started to remove objects from shelves and to consult more with Native tribes. And so some of our local museums have done that. For Mount Holyoke College Art Museum, removed 2 Native objects, and they left empty cases on view with new labels explaining the new NAGPRA rules.
Moving along, back in March, the Pittsfield High School boys basketball team was playing in a state semifinal game against Old Rochester and Worcester. At the time, the Berkshire Eagle reported a player from Old Rochester expectorated in the face of a Pittsfield player, and that the team from the Berkshires is also the target of racist epithets and other inappropriate language. Some Pittsfield supporters at the game said game officials and police at the site didn't take action. The school called on the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, which oversees high school athletics in the state, to conduct an investigation. The player from Old Rochester was removed from the team by his school. Greg, you reported on this at the time. We haven't heard much about this since, and this was a big story back in March. Has there been any follow-up from the MIAA or school officials on this incident?
Not entirely clear. What did happen was, Pittsfield High and the Pittsfield Public Schools wrote 2 letters to MIAA. They asked for an investigation. They asked for a meeting. There was a point where an MIAA official did meet with members of the team, with the player Malachi Perry, who has since graduated, about what and his family about what had happened. But the school year ended before there could be a meeting arranged, and it does not appear that one has happened in the meantime. The MIA is a a nonprofit organization, but it is not a state organization, and so. Basically, we sort of have to go with what they tell us and what they choose to tell us. We do, however, know that Berkshire County athletic directors have decided to take some action. We wrote a story, I think Dennis Spinella in our North County Bureau wrote a story, I think it was last week, that athletic directors in the Berkshires have decided they're gonna tighten up during the winter season. And if a fan is removed for any reason, then that's a 2-week suspension from attending further contests.
Dusty and Nancy, quickly, I'm curious what you think about this. Do players and fans maybe need more education about what's appropriate and what isn't while they're watching or competing?
I don't know. I just don't think we need education to be civil. I'm sorry. I don't get it. I don't get somebody spitting on a player. I think it's basic civility, basic humanity. We should treat each other with respect. So I don't know.
Dusty?
I think that this is a big issue that extends way beyond the Berkshires. I know that many people in Holyoke were saying this was happening to their youth sports players as well. There was a great viewpoint written back in November in the Republican about this. Those athletic directors in the Berkshires cracking down on this maybe seems like a positive step. Perhaps other athletic directors and leaders in the athletic world should take notice.
I know we can continue on with this conversation for a while, but I want to also make sure, since this is the end of year program, that we have our prediction, scoop, or praise time, where we'll ask our panel to make a prediction about the news, maybe spill the tea about something they're working on, or heap some praise on a newsworthy nugget. So, Nancy, I'm going to start with you as we look ahead to 2025. What's something we should maybe keep our eye out for?
Well, I'm not going to make a prediction, but I am going to tell you a prediction by somebody else. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration says we're going to have a warmer than average winter here in Western Mass.
All right. Greg, I know there's been some things you've been working on in the Berkshires.
Just a little. The Pittsfield City Council is now getting involved in a growing investigation into inappropriate relationships between teachers and students at Pittsfield High School. Also, about a week ago, the dean of students at Pittsfield High was arrested and charged with federal drug trafficking charges. What followed was a number of accusations that led to announcements of DCF investigations and administrative leave. So that situation is continuing to grow. The school committee met on Wednesday to discuss that, and they're funding an independent investigation. The city council is going to weigh in at a special meeting on Monday.
And that's something we'll keep our eye on. And quickly, Greg, I know the Pittsfield High School is operating without a lot of administrators right now because of all of this.
Right. The principal, Maggie Harrington-Esco, has, underneath her, she has a couple of vice principals and two deans of students. A vice principal and both deans of students are now among those suspended.
Yeah. So that's definitely something that we will watch in the latter stages of 2024 and going on to 2025. Dusty, what about you? Any predictions or anything you've been working on that we should keep an eye out for as the new year is coming near?
I'm always so reticent to give predictions, since as reporters we're often looking at what's happening now, what's happened in the past. But I will give out some praise, which I know is something we also do in this part of the show, to all of those really hardworking journalists toiling under tough conditions to bring truth to the world, whether it be at NEPM or the Berkshire Eagle or any of our local publications. We're going to continue doing that work in 2025, despite some of the hurdles that the economy or that this incoming administration may present.
I want to praise our subscribers for supporting us too. Because in this economic model that the media is in, the support that people actually give us for doing this important work is really important. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that.
And I will jump in and say we're very happy for our supporters here at NEPM who just contributed generously during our latest fund drive. And I'm not one for predictions either, because usually I end up being just flat wrong. But I will say that I believe as we go into 2025, journalism is still going to be working hard to keep finding those stories, especially at the local level, keep finding what the truth is and looking at it fairly and accurately, no matter what you might read on social media. All righty. Thank you to Greg Sukenik of the Berkshire Eagle, Nancy Cohen of NEPM, and Dusty Christensen of the Shoestring. This programming note that the Rundown's going to be taking a bit of a holiday hiatus for some eggnog and Christmas cookies over the next few weeks, but fear not, the show will return on January the 10th. The Rundown anthem is by the Love Crumbs. Our director is Tony Dunn, and our board op today is Phil Bishop. Our engineers are Betsy Lankto, Bart Rankin, and Chuck Dubé. Production support and digital from Ayu Suryawan. This is the Rundown on NEPM. I'm Adam Frenier in for Carrie Saldo. On behalf of all of us here, happy holidays, and thanks for listening.